Hey guys, welcome back to the Dev Marketer channel. I'm your host, J.A. Curtis. You guys can call me Alex though, but this is part 4 of our series on Laravel 5.4 new features, all right? Now, this is a pretty basic video, but it's something I definitely want you guys to know and understand. I'm gonna go through, show you a little behind the scenes, but there's really not much to do. It's just something you kind of want to know exists now in Laravel 5.4. And that's the fact that there are 2 new middlewares that basically sanitize any incoming form data. So anything other than a GET request will basically be submitted. We'll go through this middleware, and there's 2 of them. One of them is to trim all of our strings. Any string that's submitted through a form, it'll trim off all the white space before any word or any value in the string, and then it'll trim off any white space at the end of the string. Okay, so you'll just get the core thing in the middle. Don't worry if you're thinking, hey, what if I want those spaces? I'll show you guys how to keep those in there. But that's the basic concept of the first middleware. It basically just trims the ends and the beginnings of the strings. The second one will convert any empty string to null, and this is really valuable. I'll show you guys in a second more about that. But instead of in the past, if someone basically left a field empty and they submitted it, it would get submitted to the form. When we pulled it in from our request, we would just get an empty string. But now you'll get null instead, okay? And I'll talk to you guys about why you might want that here in just a moment. Let me just show you guys how it works and go from there. So here I've made a very basic form. I went ahead and just did some of the lifting ahead of time because there wasn't really much to show you guys as far as all the other stuff. So this is just a really basic form. It has field 1, field 2, submit button, and of course it would work with however many fields you have, okay? So we just gone ahead and I threw this together. Let's go ahead and open up our Laravel project, and you can see here, this is the controller. Let me start by showing you the routes. So in our routes, I've got 2 routes, a get route and a post route. And they both, one of them, I'm using the new syntax here for name. So one of them is named form and one's named form.submit. So form is the one we just looked at. And then we submit the form, it's gonna basically submit to form post in the home controller. So here's the home controller. You can see this is the index. This returns the welcome view, which shows the form. That's what we just saw. And then when they submit the form, it's going to go down to this this function right here. So what I did here is we just created a variable for data. We're pulling in field 1 data and then pulling in field 2 data, and then we're just going to return a view with the data. That's basically all there is to it. Let's go and take a look at that. What do you call them? The views. So here in the data view, you can see that we're just submitting this all inside a pre-tag, and I'm just die dumping the data so you can see exactly what's submitted. We're not going to process anything. Okay, and that's why I wanted you guys to note, I'm just pulling data out of the request directly. I'm not doing anything right here. I'm just getting it raw from the request, and then I am just going to die dump it and submit it to you guys so you guys can see it exactly, okay? So that's all that's happening. I've done no further customization, haven't turned any features on other than creating the form, which is just a basic, this is the form. So we just create a basic form, CSRF field. We've got, that's basically it. I'm just using Bootstrap styling, but it's a very basic field, not doing anything fancy. It's just any form will have this magic function now. Let's go ahead and submit the form and see how it works, okay? So field 1, let's go ahead and submit something. We're gonna just do a bunch of spaces ahead of time, and we're gonna say hello, and then a bunch of spaces. And then we're gonna do this, world, bunch of spaces, tons of spaces, more spaces. There we go. Get lots of those in there. In fact, we'll get even more. Let's just like paste a bunch. Look at all these spaces, guys. All right, so tons of spaces. Let's go ahead and submit the form. And the data that we get in our form is just the hello, exactly as it was submitted. You notice the punctuation stays on there, but any of the spaces after got trimmed off. Any of the spaces before got trimmed off. Same thing with world, it all got trimmed off, okay? So this is the exact same thing as you guys might be used to where we did trim. And we did these in some of the other previous tutorials where you would just do trim, and it trims off all the forward space and backward space. So now it's just happening behind the scenes, which is nice. Makes it a little more fluid and readable when you're working inside of your controllers. It also allows you to do mass assignment a little bit easier. I don't do mass assignment very often, so you guys have never seen mass assignment on any of my tutorials on this channel. So some of you guys that you might not be familiar with mass assignment, but mass assignment is the idea that you can basically get request data from from a form, and you can just tell Laravel to just save it to the database, and Laravel will automatically match up the form fields to the database columns and just submit the field directly, and it saves you from processing any of the data and then like saving it and stuff like that. It basically allows you to just do it in like 2-3 lines of code. Basically, you can just tell it to take all the form data and submit it to the database. I don't do mass assignment just because of personal preferences. I like to actually manage the data myself, even though it's more lines of code. So that's how I've always taught it. But if you were doing mass assignment, this allows you to do mass assignment much easier because you now don't need to pre-process any of the data to get rid of things like strings. Okay, so if you're a big fan of mass assignment, it's really, really nice. Even if you're like me and you just do it the old-fashioned way and you don't do mass assignment, it still makes life a little bit easier because you don't have to wrap everything in those trims and save it as another variable and stuff like that. So it just makes it a lot easier. The other thing that's really nice is setting empty strings to null. This is the second middleware that's applied by default. I'll just show you guys that real quick. So let's go back to our form data. I'm going to keep this here. So we've still got hello. In fact, what we'll do is we'll do hello world. And I just want to note real quick. So let's see here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's put a bunch of spaces in between hello and world. And then there's a bunch of spaces after and before. Okay. Now for world, we're just going to take all this data. I'm going to do a control A to make sure I get everything and delete it. So this is an empty form field. Okay. So we've got this field up here, and then we've got an empty field. Let's go ahead and submit it. And you'll see here that this is what I wanted to note is that trim doesn't get rid of, it takes the beginning of the string and gets rid of all those spaces. It goes to the end of the string and gets rid of all the trailing spaces. But if you have multiple spaces in the middle, it's going to keep those, okay? Just a note, that's normal. That's the way the PHP trim function works. I just want to note that though in case. So it's not surprising that it works this way, but I just want to note that for anyone that was wondering, thinking it might get rid of empty spaces. If you want to just cut multiple spaces down to one space, you'll have to write your own custom middleware, which wouldn't be very difficult, but you could definitely do that. You could do it, but... and then you'll notice this second item is actually returned as null instead of an empty string. And again, the reason you would want null to be returned is for mass assignment purposes. So if you are, again, just accepting form data and there's an optional field maybe, and someone doesn't want to submit data for that optional field, they just click submit. It'll come in as an empty string is the way it used to come in. And so when you mass assigned that field to your database, you might have a null field in the database, a null column, and that would then get unnullified and it just becomes an empty string, but there's data in it. It's just an empty string, okay? So it's no longer null even though there's no data in there basically. So that can be really annoying, especially if you do a lot of mass assignment. Even for me, I would manually change a lot of those things to null. And this is actually one of the reasons, some of the reasons that I don't do mass assignment is because I processed all the data to make sure it was nice and clean as it goes into my database. And since we're doing a lot of this here with middleware, maybe I'll change my mind about mass assignment and start doing it a little more often in Laravel, especially with some of the more basic fields that don't really require any processing outside of maybe trimming and setting empty strings to null, which are probably the two most common sanitation processes that you'll do, okay? Wow, I've talked a lot about some pretty trivial elements here, but we'll just keep going. The last thing I want to show you guys is there's not much more to demonstrate here, but I do want to show you two other things. First of all, where can you find these middlewares? Inside of your app folder, inside the HTTP folder, you'll have this kernel.php. And if you click this kernel.php, you'll find that you've got all of your middlewares that are applied. And it notes right here in the comments, this is middleware that is ran during every request of your application, okay? So We've obviously got check for maintenance mode. We have validate post size. Then we have trim strings, which is the middleware the new middleware that we just been using that trims the beginning and the end. And then we've got convert empty strings to null. That's the second one that does exactly what it sounds like. So if you want to see how the world was before all of this, or if you are anti-change and you don't want these to take effect, or maybe you're upgrading an application and you're already doing these and you don't want to go back and change it, and so you don't want the new middleware, you can cancel these out. You can just delete them, or I'll just comment them out right now. And I'll show you guys how it works without them. So I went ahead and got rid of these two middlewares here inside the kernel.php. And if I come back over here, and let's actually just go back real quick. So this is the exact same form that we had. So this string is empty. It's an empty string down here. And then this one's going to have the space, the trailing and leading space up here. Let's submit it again. And so this is, again, without the middleware. You'll see what you get. Without the middleware, we now get all that leading space, all of that trailing space. And this, instead of being null, comes in as an empty string, okay? So that's what the middleware is doing. You can see because you can just turn it on and off like this. So if we do this again, let's go ahead and submit the same form again. And now we get all of it cleans it up and turns the empty string to null, okay? So that's really, really nice. Last thing I was going to show you, and then we're done. Last thing is under HTTP controllers. Now the middleware folder, you can actually customize the trim strings middleware, okay? So inside of here, this is obviously not the middleware itself. This extends the, sorry, here we go. This extends the middleware that's already written inside of your vendor folder. However, this allows us to customize certain fields that maybe you don't want to trim strings for. So every once in a while, there might be a field that you do not want to trim the space around. For whatever reason, you might want that space ahead of time, or you might want to know if someone's submitting space ahead of time. And so in that case, you can tell this middleware to ignore certain fields in your application, okay? By default, it's ignoring password and password confirmation fields. So those will not get the space trimmed in front of them. It'll keep the space and it's just going to submit it the way they are. And just for demonstration purposes, we're going to add another one here. So let's add field 2 to this list of exceptions. And just so if I go back to the route real quick, or not the route, the view, just want to show you guys the form. So here, this input for field 2, notice that the input is named field 2. So it's getting submitted as field 2. And so field 2 is the name of it, and that's what you're matching up here. So field 2 is now going to get ignored. Now any data submitted under the field 2 name will be it will not be trimmed. So if we come back over here, let's go back and submit our data. So keep in mind that this one now will be ignored. So let's do this again. Hello world. And then lots of trailing spaces here. And then we'll do lots of trailing spaces here. Okay, there we go, submit. So once again, this one got trimmed, as you can see, and this one did not, all right? And it's all just because we put this exception in here. So if I were to delete the exception, come back over, resubmit the form, you'll see that now it trims it all, okay? So just keep that in mind. So there we go. Those are the two new middlewares that will apply automatically to your whole application. If you need to customize them, you can come here into this file and you can customize the specific fields that do not get trimmed. Or if you want to get rid of all of them entirely, just go to your kernel.php and you can just delete these or whichever one you want. Maybe you want empty strings. You don't want them converted to null. Then go ahead and just delete this one. Do whatever you got to do. Okay, that's all there is to this. Hope you guys learned a lot. I'll see you guys in the next video.